Poisonous Onion by Janet Clayton. My stories are fictional. Any correlation to reality is merely a coincidence. Poisonous Onion. Newsflash. Former Democratic leader Lao, wife, and 2 children found dead in their home. Chapter 1. As the waters lap in, I look at the warm sunlight, thinking very little. This is how a day should be spent, sitting back with a cool drink, watching the beautiful colored waves of the ocean. In this part of the world, the Philippines, the islands were known as paradise on earth, and in this moment in time it was true. I had just come back from a particularly difficult mission. The office didn't know where I was, and I really needed this time to resettle my thoughts. It was paradise, but I was not the type to sit still for long. The shack that I rented was without a phone, and the cell phone that I was assigned to me was smashed on the tarmac before I went to board the plane. It wasn't by accident that I chose the Philippines. The answer I was looking for would be found here. The COVID pandemic had made all the nations of the world a little unbalanced. Nation between nation, new wars were on the horizon. Enough blame and fear for everyone to chew on. The awareness of the lack of natural resources, easily broken supply chains, and crumbling leadership provided a gloomy forecast. There was a typhoon in the Philippines during the 2000s that caused major damage. The pandemic, COVID-19, followed that. The island nations of the Philippines were in dire straits, with need of vaccines and food. China and Japan assisted the nation. China was already the largest importer of goods, and they were the closest. I knew that the farmers of the Philippines would have all the answers and secrets that were boiling under the surface. During any uprisings of the past, it was the farmers who took up the torch to defend the nation. This was apparent during World War II, when the Japanese invaded. Hakbalahap was the name given for the resistance during World War II. It actually derived from the time Spain occupied Philippines. Spain, upon departure, created a feudal system giving land as awards for good military service. The children of the military were the landowners of today. But now the people were sick and hungry, and the government needed a scapegoat, and it was the farmers who were named. When government officials went to the farmers to ask the farmers what happened, they caused fear and embarrassment to the farmers. This was an island nation, and island people tend to take their personal responsibilities very seriously. It was said that farmers started committing suicide. However, the farmers' wives did not go along with the story and told the news media that it was the government agents that had shot their husbands. It seemed counterproductive for the farmers to be killed, as it was by all accounts a natural disaster that caused the problems. Thinking anyone can do it, they did not value the skills or the knowledge. The world was fighting the pandemic. Small nations were imperiled. Russia had invaded Ukraine, and everyone worried about the smaller nations going up against the largest militaries. A comment from the president of China caused concern for Taiwan, and that he didn't feel the smaller nations like Ukraine had sovereignty. That's when the United States went, oh no, what about the small Pacific nations? If China is questioning the validity of Ukraine, what is to stop them from taking over Taiwan and the Philippines? The Philippines were the closest the U.S. could get to China if the trouble had started, and they needed a place to deploy from. But the U.S. had a bad past with the Philippines, as they once occupied it, and they pretty much left it on the back burner, no matter what the crisis. When the Philippines were dealing with the pandemic, so was the U.S. Now the U.S. desperately wanted to be back with the Philippines' good graces. They saw Taiwan as being in danger of becoming another state of China. If you're flying to the Philippines from the U.S., most flights will take you through Taiwan or Korea, and the distance was not unnoticed by the U.S. government. Chapter 2. Just like myself, the government of the Philippines knew it was the farmers who would know what was going on. I was going to visit the farming region of the north to ask questions with the hope of uncovering something that would tell me why farmers were being shot. Corporate farming was everywhere. The cost, technology, and laws that had made the smaller farmers slowly fading into the past. China was a big presence. They had multiple companies in the country, and the farms were a part of that. The place I was staying was north of San Juan on the island of Luan. The northern part of the Philippines is where the crops are grown. It was going to travel inland to Baguio City and meet with the executive of S Corporation. I had contacted Arnell. He was the son of a large farming corporation in the Philippines. He was a well-traveled young man, and his position with the company was not figurative. He contributed to the crisp professional persona that was demonstrated on all the surfaces. Nearby to the S Corporation, there is a military base, military academy, military airport. There was, of course, a lot happening. The EDCA, or Extended Defense Corporation Agreement, was updated to include the ability for the U.S. to take over all transportation at a moment's notice. This included seaports, airports, and roads. It was a slap in the face to many Chinese companies that were already doing business in the area. They would undoubtedly have more information than the U.S. government. China was building dams and infrastructure. Clearly, the tension was high, and the president of the Philippines was walking a fine line trying to stay safe. He felt he needed the protection of the U.S. and the good relations with China as well. China was the closest and had been a good partner, and in the past, as I said, tensions were high and territory control were everyone's desires. Marcos had set up meetings with the Chinese, but things did not go well. On their last encounter, there was a little dust-up over natural resources. Natural resources were, of course, the beginning of any war. I drove over close to Baguio City. Arnell was there to meet me and drive me in. It was a beautiful place with multicolored buildings situated on an incline. This was a cooler region, and tourists were regulated as to how many could enter the city each day. I did not have the appointment to enter, but then I didn't want anyone to know that I was there. I was able to enter without question, though. I had let Arnell know what day I was going to be there, so he met me on the outskirts of town and drove me in. The guardhouse, seeing him, let us pass without question. The guardsmen were close relatives of the farmers, whose underground would know everything and the best informed, better than any government involved. My contact, Arnell, was the son of a large corporate farming operation. He was young for his position he held, but he was brilliant, and he had studied agricultural practices. He had a plan to make the farming corporation he was in line to inherit the best of the best. Arnell was giving me a tour of the building when Rolando walked up to us in a brisk pace. I was introduced to Rolando as chief of operations. As I was being introduced to him, he stepped between Arnell and myself, seizing the conversation as if he was giving the tour. I realized why, as Arnell's father, Jacinto, was now approaching from down the hall. The office building was a glass steel structure, with security and affluence written on every angle. Upon meeting his father, I quickly realized that he had very entrenched ideals for what should happen to anything and everything. He distrusted the U.S. and leaned toward China as the future. He was not unaware of U.S. and their plans for the country he called home. He was a hard, cold man. His eyes were pointed as well as his nose. His dance was casual, but he was anything but casual. Wearing all black, his clothes showed no creases. His wife, once a model of fame, was a public relations dream. She had, by marrying him, made his name well known, but now lived in a sanitarium. It was said that she had declined into alcoholism as a result of her husband's philandering. As he stood there smiling at Rolando speaking, I could tell he was a person who paid for his relations. This was to avoid any inconvenient feelings. I could see that Arnell was upset. On the drive back, I asked what it was all about. He said that Rolando was involved in everything, and he couldn't get his father's ear. He was, after all, the one that would be taking over the company when his father retired, but he was being cut out of the meetings, and his father barely spoke to him about the important matters. This all had happened recently, and he felt that he was being pushed out. Knowing what Arnell had contributed to the company, I comforted him. I said these things have a way of working themselves out. Rolando's tour of the company was extensive, and I really did feel that I had seen everything. Chapter 3. As he drove me back to the car outside the city, we spoke about what he thought was being done in the shadows. He said political affiliations are tense, and his father was in the research department working on a special project that he was not privy to. He couldn't understand what they could be working on that he was not involved in. The research department was his department, and his father had shown only momentary interest. Now Rolando and his father were in his department doing something he was not involved in. He was actually kicked out of his own office while they had a conversation about who knows what. About a week later, Arnell told me he was willing to pull the security tapes to find out what the project was about. During this time, he found regular shipments of onions being sent to Taiwan's government offices as gifts and promotions of their products. The money trail was odd, as the records for transactions were not accurate. He found shipping registers stating that onions were only sent once, but he knew they had been sent every month for the past year. It was well known that the region's diet was heavy in onions. Most diets were 25% onions. This gift to the Taiwan Democratic Office was a regular occurrence. Rolando, for some reason, was in the building, and he popped his head in as he was looking, and I was looking over the books. He had a smile on his face, the kind of smile that says, "I know what you're up to." Arnell had the keys to Rolando's office, and after making sure that he was not there, went to see if he could find anything there. On his desk was the security tape. I had no idea why this tape would be in Rolando's office, but he plugged it in and the recorder, and he saw that his father and the research lead were talking. They were talking about onions due to be shipped to Taiwan and how the project was going. The other research assistant that he had never seen before said the results would be undetectable after consumption. It hit him hard. The Taiwan leader and his family all dead. It hurt. It was his father. He was the killer, and this was his method. He called me on the burner phone, fearing for his own life. I told him, "Don't take your own car. Catch a cab unseen if at all possible. I will drive over and meet you and get the tape." They drove back to the beach house and watched the tape together. Then I drove him back, knowing he was in danger. The father had developed a poisonous onion, and it was shipped to the family of Lau for their table. The assassination was successful, and the whole family was killed. Arnell didn't think his father knew about the video, but he did know Rolando did. He decided to confront his father. He planned to do it the next day. When I didn't hear from him, I called. Tragedy. Arnell was dead, shot in the head, in his father's office. Security footage showed Arnell walking into his father's office only to find Rolando sitting there. Some conversation, and then Rolando pulling a gun and shooting him. As I had now sent the tape to my office, I went to the city to speak with the officials there. I saw his father being taken into his custody with no emotion on his face. He was now going to lose everything. The son knew nothing about the poisonous onions. It was increasingly hard to understand his father's action and why he seemed to push aside his son, who by all accounts was raising up the company. He was a great man, and it was his greatness that killed him.